other people may mosey in, but I think we should go ahead and just start. And so, like I said last time, each time we'll just start with just the refuge. For those of you who have the yellow prayers, it's on the, if you haven't, it's fine, it's okay, but on the first page, we'll just do the refuge and generating bodhicitta in English 3 times. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And then I think each time we'll start with a short meditation. Then we'll do another meditation later, so we'll try to meditate twice both sessions. And so what I want to try to do though is is to meditate on the we'll meditate just for a little while on the space-like clarity of mind, which those of you who are doing it hopefully have practiced stuff. So those of you who are taking it fully and hopefully practiced that. We'll do that, and then we'll start on a new meditation towards the end today. But so get comfortable. Have your back as straight as have your back straight. If that's comfortable, that's okay. We'll go over some in establishing a daily practice. We'll actually go over the details of posture for meditation. But for today, just try to have your back straight. Make yourself comfortable. For a few minutes we'll meditate on that, the meditation that we did last time on the space-like clarity of mind. So just as a beginning point, if you like, you could bring to mind like the mental image or thought of space, right? Just as a kind of entryway. Right? So you can think of like the image of a clear, open sky, just before dawn. It's quite crisp and already illuminated, but even the sun is not sort of there, as though the sun were about to rise. So it's this kind of sense of a very crisp, clear, open, not even quite blue yet, that kind of spaciousness. What we're sort of connecting with experientially here is that sense of the mind as being space-like, in the sense of being unobstructed, having no color, no shape, no tactility, untouchable, of being open. So kind of connecting with that sense of openness, or bring our mind to that sense of openness, spaciousness, unobstructedness. As you try to bring your mind, or begin to bring your mind to that sense of spaciousness, You may notice a kind of subtle mental image that you have of being in this place, or a place. Recognize that that's a mental image. It's an image in our mind of a place. And for the purpose of this meditation, we can kind of relax that. We don't have to grasp at that. We can notice that mental image, but notice that it's within the spaciousness and openness of the mind. So we can kind of let that relax. Notice the sense of our body, the mental image in our mind of a body sitting. Again, that mental image is a mental image. It's okay. But for the purpose of this meditation, we can even let that relax. Almost as though it were dissolving into that space. Of course, actually, there's nothing to dissolve because it's just a mental image. Sort of let that go and let our mind begin to kind of blend with spaciousness, openness. If thoughts or feelings arise, that's fine, but we notice that they're in some sense, one could say, arising within that spaciousness of the mind. And also they're not separate from it. So by noticing that, they kind of dissolve of their own accord. Or another way of saying it is they're seen in the context of being just not separate from space, space-like nature of the mind. Even the mental image of someone meditating that's separate from the meditation, or an eye that's separate from that spaciousness. Again, you can recognize that's just another mental image. So you can kind of also just let that relax. Sense of an eye that's separate from that space-like appearance, or spaciousness, or openness of mind. Whatever arises, and sometimes you can just let it dissolve. So that all that there is that space-like, clear, unobstructedness. We're letting it, in one sense you could say blending the mind with that. In a sense, just letting go of anything that distracts the mind from that nature. few more minutes as you kind of experiment with this meditation. As you relax a sense of an I that's separate from other, or a sense of nearness that's separate from farness. As you relax sort of those dualistic habits, you can notice also that not only is the mind unobstructed, but also like space, there's a sense of infinite, of it being infinite, or of it's having no boundaries, no limits. Okay, let's come back together. Kind of come into more interactive, out of infinity to a more limited perspective. I don't know if there are chairs back there. If not, there are more up here.
I apologize, but the directions didn't tell me there were 2 North Shore drives, so I got fouled up and
there's more chairs.
GPS.
yeah.
Okay. So we just meditate on the space-like clarity of mind, right? And later we'll do another meditation on the mind as a knower. Right? So I just hinted the answer to this question. But so for people who were here last time, again, in Buddhism, what's the definition of mind?
Clear.
Yeah, that which is clear and known. So we just meditate, so that's a meditation on one of the 2 aspects, right? The clarity, or space-like nature. So later we'll do a meditation on the knowing nature of mind. And the idea, of course, is that, and again, this is like, I just want to emphasize, this is really Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche's approach. Like, at the monastery, they would study these things for years, and then they go meditate on them. But I think Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche realized, for Westerners, that's not such a good idea. If you expect Westerners to study something for like 3 or 4 years and then meditate, it's not going to work, right? So we have to meditate right. We study it and then immediately we meditate on it. You know, and this should be quite integrated. So that's the way we're approaching it. Okay, so remember that. So right, so mind is that which is clear and knowing, right? That was from last time. Since we're talking about, we have to know what we're working with. Actually, I don't want to dwell on this. I just want to make one other brief comment related to last time, just for people who are still thinking about that, and then we'll not focus on this today. But last time I mentioned this question of what does it mean for something to exist, right? Remember we got into that a little bit. So I just want to say that there are different, again, because there are different schools of Buddhist thought, there are always differences in different presentations. But the standard definition in Buddhism, in Buddhist philosophy, is something that exists is something that's known by a valid cognition. And the Sanskrit, sometimes you'll hear, just for people who are interested, or like one of the 5 topics that people read is pramana, that monks study at the monastery, right? Like if somebody's becoming a geshe, one of the 5 things they study is pramana, like the Pramana Vartika. It's a text. But pramana means valid cognition, that's the translation of that. So something that exists is something that that's known by valid cognition. There even, one is just as people are thinking about it, I thought I wanted to share that. But another thing is this, is already in Buddhism, you see, this is a very basic topic, we're not yet, like, we're at the beginning, right? But already it implies something, right? That something that exists is dependently arisen, right? In other words, it depends on a knower and the known, right? Already you get that sense, right? So what does it mean to exist? It means it's a thing, right, that's known by a valid cognizer. So already there's a sense of, for something to exist, it's interdependent. You already get that sense that interdependence implies emptiness. Emptiness implies interdependence. So already, even at the beginning of Buddhism, it's already starting to imply the most important teachings of Buddhism. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. But that's not the main topic for today. You know, in one way, if you think of this, like the title of this course, this series, this first module, right, is Mind and its Potential. So last time we talked about mind, today we're going to talk a little bit about its potential. And then we'll go back into mind more. And those two aren't separate topics, but I just want, in terms of emphasis. And so, in terms of its potential, I want to start with this. So, there's another whole module where we're talking about who is the Buddha. So I'm not asking who is the Buddha right now. I'm asking a different question. What's a Buddha? So what does it mean? You say, like we're studying Buddhism, right? We're discovering Buddhism. So Buddhism is something that came from the Buddha or a Buddha. So what's a Buddha?
Someone who's awake.
Okay. So you're getting at the etymology to some extent, right? Because Bud means wake. In Sanskrit, the root Bud means wake. So Buddha is a person who awakened, right? Buddha is an awake one. Yeah, so someone who's awakened. Anybody else? What's a Buddha?
Someone who is enlightened.
Yeah. And what does enlightened mean? Because we say that right at the very beginning. We say, through the merits of listening to Dharma, may I become a Buddha, or may I become enlightened, right? We say different things like, but what does that mean? Right? Yeah, great idea. Because it makes sense, right? At the beginning of a series of classes on discovering Buddhism, that we ask the question, what's a Buddha? And what does it mean, enlightenment, right? We say, oh, I want to get enlightened. But what does that mean, actually? Right? And isn't it strange? Because those are terms that everybody, you know, I mean, if you have any interest in Buddhism, then everybody uses terms, enlightenment, awakening, and Buddha. But then what those mean is can become confusing in some sense, right? And actually, say this too, like, other this, like, you know, I guess I'll say this: there are many different ways of describing the qualities of the Buddha and what a Buddha is, and therefore what awakening or enlightenment are, right? I thought to share this because it was helpful to me personally a little bit when I heard it first. In the there's another actually, the Dalai Lama says that we're supposed to follow the Sanskrit tradition, right? The tradition of Nalanda, the great scholars of Nalanda. So we're doing that today in some sense, because I already mentioned Pramana now. I mean, that's like in one of the other 5 great treatises that the monks study. It's called the Ornament for Clear Realizations. And actually, does anybody know who wrote that? Who wrote that book? Maitreya. Yeah, Maitreya wrote that. So in the Ornament for Clear Realizations, it says there's a point where it basically says that the qualities of a Buddha are inconceivable. And so they say, so if you want to understand a Buddha, the Abhisamankara says, Maitreya says, I'm going to describe to you the qualities that somebody generates on different stages as they're progressing towards Buddhahood. And if you can understand those qualities, then that will give you some inkling of what it's like to be a Buddha. And so that sort of makes sense. That's one way of understanding what a Buddha is. But so in one sense, it's inconceivable. But basically, I'm going to start with there are different ways of describing the qualities of a Buddha, but I want to start with a simple way, right? Because we don't want to get too complicated. So one simple way of describing a Buddha's qualities is this: a Buddha is somebody who has eliminated every bad quality and achieved every good quality possible. And so what they mean by every bad, I want to go through this though. So what is it? First of all, every bad quality, what does that mean, actually? Right? So last time we said, right, the whole Dharma path, the definition of a path is in your mind. Right? So they're talking about every bad quality of mind. And so, so as a person progresses on the path, they have what are called cessations. It means like that bad qualities permanently stop. And so, for example, like bad qualities would be like, there are some that are very obvious, like hatred. Right? So a Buddha is somebody who can't any longer experience hatred, right? Jealousy, even suffering. Suffering is a bad quality, right? Nobody wants to suffer. Buddha can't have that anymore. It's incapable of suffering. So basically all the afflicted states of mind, the Buddha has stopped all of those. Right? So a Buddha is not capable of having any anger, any jealousy, any craving, any sense of insecurity, any sense of anxiety, all those kind of, any state of mind that's afflicted, Buddha can't have those. Actually, that's common though to what are called arhats, foe destroyers. They also don't have any of those. But there's another bad quality of mind that a Buddha has gotten rid of. That a person who's achieved individual liberation, arhat, or a person who's achieved individual liberation, also gets rid of all those, all the afflictions like jealousy, anger, craving. But there's another quality that a Buddha's gotten rid of, which are they're called obstructions to knowing. So the Buddha also gets rid of the subtle stain of dualistic thinking, that they're separate from others, and by getting rid of that, they're actually capable of knowing everything that can be known. If it can't be known, the Buddha doesn't know it. If it can be known, then the Buddha knows. So they say. So so one quality of a Buddha. Somebody said there are two, right? So one is the Buddha's eliminated all negative qualities of mind, right? They purify their mind. That's what we're focusing on here, is mind, right? So one quality of a Buddha is they've gotten rid of all the negative qualities. But then another quality of a Buddha is that they've also generated all the positive potentials of the mind to their fullest extent. And so what does that mean, right? I'll give an example, right? Everybody has a certain amount of love. Right? And everybody has a certain amount of compassion. I'm just giving two examples of two positive states of mind, right? But a Buddha is somebody who has cultivated each of those, I'm just giving those examples, right? But a Buddha has taken each of the positive qualities of mind and cultivated it to its ultimate extent, or to its perfection, until it's infinite. And when it's infinite, you can't cultivate that anymore. Right? And it's already cultivated to its final degree. And so that's one simple way of describing the qualities of Buddha. It's somebody who's eliminated all the faults and completed all the good qualities to their fullest extent. And so in one sense, you could say, if you say, what's enlightenment, right? You could say, well, that's enlightenment then. Enlightenment, if you've done that, then you're done, right? There's nothing left. Whereas if you've gotten rid of every single obstruction and affliction and ignorance and unknowing and foolishness and negativity, and you've cultivated every kind of positive quality like joy, love, wisdom, empathy, all those things, if you've cultivated all those to their fullest extent, then you're done, you're enlightened. So that's sort of logical, right, in terms of what enlightenment would be. And so that's starting point, right? That's the definition. So that's one way. That's a simple definition, right? So what's a Buddha? It's somebody who's awake. What does awake mean? It means those they've eliminated all the bad qualities and cultivated all the good qualities completely. So this relates to the topic I wanted to focus on today some, which is Buddha nature. And actually, I want to say this too. Like, I think this is, I don't know why when I first realized it, I thought it was strange, but actually in Sanskrit and Tibetan, there's not really a term for Buddha nature. And so that's an American, an English language term. They say Tathagarbha, which means the essence of a Tathagata. So that's what they call it, but we've translated that into Buddha nature. and what's it, actually Tathagata, what's that? So Tathagata usually is translated as somebody who's thus gone, or gone beyond. It's just another epithet for the Buddha. And actually, in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, the Buddha says, what is that? The Buddha himself says, what is it? You know, people call him the Tathagata, right? That's one of the titles people gave him. You know, just like they gave him, they called him Buddha, they called him Tathagata. And he says, I haven't gone anywhere though. He says, he says, I've gone to reality. It's something like, I don't know exactly, that's different ways to translate, but he says, I haven't gone anywhere, I've just gone to reality. He sees things realistically. That's what it means. So he says, so, you know, somebody who's gone thus means they've just gone to reality, which means they've gone into their own nature. They've understood the nature of their own mind, actually. And that's what Tathagata is in some sense. But so this idea, right? So that in these certain teachings, and actually, okay, since we're doing this, I'll say. So the Buddha taught this idea of Tathagata Garbha. Say it right. A Buddha nature, I'll call it though, because that's easier. So the Buddha taught that, and then the most well-known text on that that's studied is the Uttara Tantra. And who wrote that text? Does anybody know? Also Maitreya. Maitreya wrote 5 texts, and this is one of them. Maitreya wrote the Uttara Tantra. It means the sublime continuum, they call it. And actually, I'll say something about that. Right? Why is it sublime? Well, he's talking about Buddha nature. Right? So it's the most sublime thing about you is that you have this. And then continuum is interesting, right? Because continuum means it's your mind, right? It's a continuum that's inside of you in some sense. So this is a very important point, actually, in Buddhism. Especially, and it's mainly taught in Mahayana Buddhism, the great vehicle Buddhism. So the idea is this: what Buddhism is asserting is that you have the ability to become awake, that you have the ability to become enlightened, that you have the ability to become a Buddha. Right? These all mean the same thing. Right? I'm just using synonyms here. That there's something about you that allows you to become an infinitely loving, infinitely wise being. Now, to me, this is a very, and I want to keep discussing this today because I think it's a very important point, and I think that on some level, I think nobody here believes that. As I would assert that. Maybe on some level you might, like intellectually, but I think on some level I don't think anybody believes that fully. And actually, I'll assert that in part because actually in that same text I was talking about, the Ornament for Clear Realizations, they say that even like though somebody can generate bodhicitta, actually, so if somebody generates bodhicitta, of course they believe that they can become enlightened. And on some level they have doubts actually still. And that actually is quite far along the path that somebody really gains. There was once somebody starts actually having those cessations where they realize, wow, this stopped. Wow, I don't no longer have that delusion. Wow, I've gained this realization. That new levels of confidence start arising in their own Buddha nature. And that makes sense, right? Whereas you could read about it or think about it and say, that makes sense, I believe I have Buddha nature. But then as you start actually gaining those qualities, a different level of confidence would arise. That's logical, right? So the Order for Clear Realization says that at different levels, bodhisattvas start going like, wow, I believed it before, but now, like, and then they get a real sense of inspiration, like new levels of inspiration. You know, when they suddenly see like, what's the word, like deluded states of mind start falling away one after another, and they realize, wow, I'll never have that delusion again. Wow, I'll never have that delusion again. They start experiencing incredible realizations of love and of altruism and of different things like that at levels they never experienced before, that they start going, wow, if the mind can do this, then it makes sense. It's so logical that a few more can happen and I can become a Buddha, right? You know, whereas at our level, you know, it's harder to have that level of conviction. But conviction in this is important, you know, because think about it, right? In other words, somebody is not going to set out to achieve enlightenment if they don't believe they can be enlightened. It would be silly to do that. So it's a very important question. Can you, you know, is there this Buddha nature or not? And I just want to pause one more time just to say, like, so this is, the idea here is not that, you know, Buddhism, when it's talking about Buddha nature, right, isn't talking about, they're not talking about like people in India and Tibet specifically, right? They're not saying people in India and Tibet have Buddha nature. But they're saying you have Buddha nature. That's I mean, this is an important point. So as we're thinking about this, you have to analyze it in terms of yourself, because that's where it's important. You know, if somebody says, did the Buddha have Buddha nature? You can say, okay, yeah, I believe that. That makes sense. But the question is, do you have Buddha nature? Right? That's the relevant question to contemplate today. So does that make sense? That's what we're trying to look at. Actually, I wanted to share, before we get into we'll get a little bit philosophical, and then we'll do that discussion thing that we did last time. But before we get into too much philosophy about it, I want to share there are in that text, the Sublime Continuum, there are 9 metaphors that Maitreya uses to discuss Buddha nature. And I'll start with one. He says, this one. He gives the example. These are metaphors that he's using to try to explain this to people, right? And he says, Maitreya says, you know, it's like a really, really poor person, like a person who's struggling to have enough money to eat, right? And they have a kind of shack that they live in. But buried under the living room, in there, like there's a living room, you know, like the floor, there's the dirt, and you know, a few feet down under the living room is a chest with a huge treasure in it, but the person doesn't know it's there. That's what Maitreya says. He says that's one metaphor he uses for Buddha nature. And he says, so this person's starving, they're struggling, every day they're worrying, and yet right there, under their own living room, is this chest of treasure of incredible wealth. And what Maitreya is saying there is, he says, that's you. You know, that's me. In other words, I'm not saying only you, I'm included. But he's saying that's us, right? That's how we are. That from when Maitreya looks at us, right? Maitreya is the next Buddha, so he's a 10th level Bodhisattva. So when Maitreya looks at us, that's what he sees. He sees somebody who's struggling. You know, it's a metaphor, right? It's a financial metaphor. But what he's saying is, right? We struggle and we suffer and we have all these problems, and yet somewhere inside of us is a potential to be something incredible, right? So something infinitely different than what we are and more happy than we are. I'll give another one. Actually, I thought this one reminds me of like some there are movies like this, I think. He says, imagine a family, right? And this family is like struggling terribly, and there's this, and the wife is, and the wife is pregnant, and they're in extreme poverty and being maybe like, what's the word, politically oppressed or something like that, and living under extreme oppression. But you as the viewer, right, you know, some of these movies are like this, but you as the viewer know that the child inside her womb is the future emperor, right, of the entire kingdom. You know, so as you're watching that, like, you know, sometimes there are movies like that where you're watching it and you know the future, in other words, because it's a movie, right? And Maitreya is saying, again, it's a similar metaphor. In other words, that you know, you're living under all kinds of oppression and problems, and yet again, inside of you is something that will give you infinite power over those kinds of problems. Another traditional metaphor for that, I think it comes from Maitreya too, is the lotus coming out of the mud. Right? You know, so you look at a pond, especially at the very beginning of spring, right? It looks disgusting and like all this muck in there, and you know, sort of poop from different things. And it would seem impossible that something as beautiful and, you know, as a white lotus. I just saw one recently, like where you see an open white lotus. It would be impossible for an open white lotus to come out of that. And yet, later in the spring, when you look, there's this perfectly pure-looking white lotus. How can that come out of that muck? It seems impossible. But the seed for it is there, right? The seed was already there. When you looked earlier, you could never have guessed that, right? You never would think, oh, there's going to be something like that. But the seed was already there to begin with. So these are all metaphors, right? They're just examples. But you get the feeling of what, the reason why I want to share some of those, because you get the feeling of what Maitreya is getting at. But if he's talking about you, right? He's saying you don't know what your potential is. And I'll share now, this is my own, I always try to differentiate like traditional Buddhist teaching from my own opinion. So this is my own opinion now. But I think it relates a little bit to self-esteem, actually, right? Like think about it just for a few minutes, right? Like when you think about having or not having self-esteem, and when you think about what people focus on for self-esteem, actually, right? Like for self-confidence, right? What qualities do you think about, right? Like sometimes you talk to people who like are struggling with self-esteem, right? And they talk about, oh, how does my nose look? Is it too long? Is it too short? Or how my eyes? Do they look pretty? Or something like that. Am I tall enough or short enough? Am I too thin or too fat? Right. So that like if we base sometimes we base our self-image on those kind of qualities, right? And we think, and then sometimes we might base our self-image on like our house, or how much we earn, or what car we drive. Right? That's another basis for a self-image. Right? So you can and I'll say this is definitely true, right? That you can base your self-image on anything if you choose to focus on it enough, you can start basing your self-image on any kind of nonsense, actually, right? Like, think of it in high school. Does this person like me or not? That's the basis of my self-image thing. That so-and-so likes me or doesn't like me. Could become the basis of your self-image at a certain time, right? Or when you're young, it's maybe your grades, and it could be good or right. You can say, oh wow, I'm so cool, I don't care about that. Or you can say, I'm so great, I do care about it, and I'm really smart. Or I'm so great, I'm smart, but I don't care about it, and I get bad grades and see how great I am. You can base it on any kind of, you can make up anything, actually, right? And you can base it on and also it's funny, a lot of it's cultural too, right? You can say, in one culture you can say, oh, it's so great because and it's also at different times, right? Oh, it's so great, I'm really skinny, that's really good. Then another cultural time, oh, it's like you look sick, you're so skinny, so but it's all labels in our minds, right? So we can base on all different things our self-image, right? And you know what I mean, right? And also you can base it on, am I popular? Right? Do people like me or do people not like me? You can base, a lot of it is based on what people say to you, right? Somebody says something critical, really critical, then you have a terrible self-image, right? Your self-image goes down, then they say something good, your self-image goes up. So you can base your self-image on all different things, right? So I think, now again, this is my opinion to some extent, but I think it's reasonable, that the teaching on Buddha nature is saying, don't base your self-image on something superficial, right? Because if you base it on something superficial, what's going to happen? Everything superficial will be lost, actually, right? In other words, if you base your self-image on anything that's a superficial trait of yours, it's always going to be insecure, right? Because those things can be taken away. On the one hand, for sure, right? If you base it on money or job or status, well, those can be taken away, right? If you base it on your appearance, that will be taken away, right? Like if you look a certain way, just wait around. You won't look that way after a while. So that's clear. In other words, if you base it on something super, if you base it on, oh, does this person like me? Obviously, right? It's totally insecure. But if you base your self-image, right? If you base your confidence and your self-esteem, I'm calling it too, on something that's deep, on something that is completely fundamental to your nature, right? Something that nobody can ever take away, and that's the most important thing about you, actually, right? Something not superficial, but something most important. That's a better basis. So I think that's implied. Again, they don't. My trade didn't say self-esteem. That wasn't actually even Tibetans don't Tibetans don't. They don't believe in that. Not they don't believe in it, but there's no such. They said, what are you talking about? The Dalai Lama used to say, I've talked with Lama Zopa Rinpoche about that before, and he said Tibetans don't have self-esteem problems. He said we never talked about that. It's not our concept. It doesn't exist in our culture really. He said, because he was like, why would people sit around thinking about that? To him it was just bizarre, but that people don't in their culture. In other words, it's not an issue in their. It's a cultural difference. That's just not it's not something in their culture that's even considered. You do what you can do. Is there, if you don't do it, they say they'll go, yeah. You mean if you feel bad if you do something like Lama Zopa had the same. He goes, do you mean I don't know the exact words, but basically he said, do you mean if you do something really bad and then you feel bad about it? I'm like, no, that's regret. That's not, that's like feeling, that's like regret. That's not self-esteem. And he goes, oh, then I don't know what you're talking about. And then he was like, but because he's been around Westerners for a long time, then he actually did know what I was talking. We talked about it, but he said, but in our culture we don't know. That's irrelevant or something. So Lama Zopa understood what I was talking about, but in their culture it's not. It's just completely irrelevant. And the Dalai Lama has said the same thing. It's not. So Maitreya didn't talk about self-esteem because it wasn't part of his culture either. Actually, Maitreya lives in a God realm. right now, so I don't think it's a problem in the Tushin of Pure Land. They don't struggle with self-esteem issues, it seems, or even in Tibet they don't. But in the West we do. Right? So, anyway, so the implication of this, right, is if you want to develop a self-image, this makes sense? That it makes sense to base on something that you can't lose, that will never be taken away, that nobody else can take from you. You can't even lose it yourself, even if you do something really stupid. But that's also really significant, deeply meaningful, and fundamental to your nature. Does that make sense? Is that logical? Like that, if we're going to have a self-image, might as well base it on that. Unless we decide not to have a self-image, that's a different question. But we'll get to that today. But anyway, okay. So what is Buddha nature then? Right? So obviously, what we talked about earlier sort of implies it, right? It means, what is Buddha nature? And actually, philosophically, there are different kinds of Buddha nature. There are different, different, first of all, different Buddhist schools, like philosophical schools, describe Buddha nature in slightly different ways, but mostly the Mahayana ones are getting at the same point. But also, there's what's called the naturally abiding Buddha nature and the developing Buddha nature. And first of all, everybody has both. I mean, everybody has the potential for both. But naturally abiding, I'll say briefly, I don't want to get into that one too much, that's the emptiness of your own mind, in some sense. And I don't want to explain that. That's not the main point for today. We can talk about it. We can talk about it some if people want, but that's not the main thing. But the developing Buddha nature is also quite important, because even an ant has the capacity. You say, does an ant have Buddha nature? Yes, it's clearly in Buddhist philosophy. But so say it this way, right? So Buddha nature means, and again, I'm going to stay on I'm not going to get usually philosophical here, but fairly straightforward. So Buddha nature means, if enlightenment means somebody has gotten rid of, right, all their bad qualities and completed all their good qualities, Buddha nature means that the very nature of your mind has the capacity to do that. Does that make sense? So that means this. Sometimes it's weird, like the translation stuff, because like Jeffrey Hopkins used the word adventitious. Like I never knew what does adventitious mean in English? I know what it means now because of Jeffrey Hopkins, I guess, but I think it's like a difficult word. Anyway, I'm going to use it. I'm going to use a different word then. What it's getting at is this: is every single delusion, every single what's the word? Afflicted state of mind, every single afflictive emotion in your mind. Jeffrey Hopkins is adventitious. What it means is this: is it's temporary. It's not in the very nature of your mind, right? And first of all, that's obvious, isn't it? Because you're not, nobody, even the most hateful person in the world doesn't experience hatred all the time, right? And even the most jealous person in the world sometimes isn't thinking about jealousy because they're too hungry, right? Or they're too angry at that moment to think about jealousy, or they're too much, whatever, something else, right? So part of this is that the afflictions, right, the faults of your mind are not inherent to your mind. Does that make sense? They're not in the very nature and essence of your mind. They can be removed from the mind. Right? They're not there all the time, and they're not essential to its nature. Right? Because the essential nature of the mind, as we said last week, is something which is clear and known. Right? Now, within what's clear or unobstructed and knowing, anything can arise. Because it's clear, it's unobstructed. So any kind of idea, right? You can have the most beautiful idea or the most terrible idea in your mind, but neither one is actually inherent to your mind. Does that make sense? So you could think of the most beautiful mathematical concept, you could think of a beautiful piece of music, or you could think of killing somebody. And all those can arise in your mind, but none of those specific thoughts are inherent to your mind. Right? They arise and they pass away. And actually, like, and if you're educated to some new concept, then that new concept can arise in your mind, right? But it won't arise unless somebody tells you about it, and it's not there permanently, right? You don't think it all the time. So the idea here, does that make sense? I just want to make sure this is clear. That the idea here is this: is that you could say any affliction, but actually any state of mind, really. Any emotion, any idea is not inherent to the mind. Yeah, go ahead.
Are you saying that emotions like love and anger Is that they learn?
But it's saying, yes, actually, in a sense, yeah, you could say that. Learned, but not, like, or maybe learned is the wrong word, but conditioned is the better word. That they arise through causes and conditions, and that they're, you know, so some of them, for example, can be, like, because some of them, for example, would be also partly conditioned by a particular kind of life form, right? Like, for example, look at an example, like, you know, if you're born as a human being, right, like a typical human being, right, then you can experience, I'm going to say with simply love you, attachment, and like you can experience attachment to something, and you can experience anger, right? You know, automatically those are capacities for an ordinary person's mind,
Correct.
right?
So that's not learning.
But they're still conditioned, would be the view. Like, I'll give an example of what I mean. Like, if you're born as a snake, the evidence would suggest that attachment doesn't, like, the kind of attachment that mammals experience is not experienced by a snake. So one is, so I'm just getting at a subtle, well, maybe not subtle, but one distinction is this, is learned and conditioned are different, right? Like, in other words, that still, it arises through conditioning, would be the Buddhist view. And so I mean, it's conditioned by the particular neurological system, right? That for sure, some animals can't experience certain kinds of emotions, right? Whereas others can. But that doesn't seem like it fully answers. So go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, just like little babies, little babies, just born.
Mm-hmm.
They can get angry.
Mm-hmm.
They do. But so if it's not inherent, where did that come from? Because I didn't teach them to be angry.
Yeah.
Believe me, my son could get angry.
No, I believe you too. I agree 100%.
And just, if I didn't teach it to them, where did it come from if it's not inherent? If it's the potential, but then that seems to be not what you're saying. That it's not, that the negatives are not a potential from being born. Does that make,
Yeah,
or
that makes
did I
sense.
misunderstand?
No, that makes sense. So I'll say, like still, yeah, so okay, so in the Buddhist view, right, because I'm giving a Buddhist answer to that question, the Buddhist view would be this, would be that it's dependent, that still it's dependent, right? In other words, it's not, like if the nature of mind in and of itself is just something that's clear and knowing, it's not inherent to that. But that when, and this gets into a complicated thing about karma, right? So from a Buddhist point of view, but the Buddhist view would be this, would be that it's dependent on a couple of different factors. One is that being's karma from a previous lifetime, and then the nature of the body that being took birth in. And so I'll give an example, like from a Buddhist, this is a Buddhist answer to that, right? So the Buddhist view would be this, for example, is that if somebody, I'm trying to give an example like what I mean. In other words, that like among human beings, right? There are some, like first of all, they'll say this: among human beings, it's clear, even among young children, like babies, right, that some babies have more irritability, right? More ability to feel angry. Others are much less irritable. You know, some are much more attached. Others are kind of less. What's the word?
Independent.
Aloof. Yeah. Independent, whatever. That even among human babies, that's true, right? And Buddhism would say, well, that's dependent. The Buddhist view would be, well, that's dependent on those individual beings' past karma, and then which is related to also the nature of the kind of body and neurological makeup that they took birth in. And then other life forms have other dispositions, right? Like, and that's clear, right? Like animals have different dispositions than humans in terms of emotions. Like different animals, some animals have wildly different kinds of emotional makeups than human beings do. But so the Buddhist view, why is it that one living creature is of this kind and one is of that? Even among humans, why is it that one is more angry and one is more irritable and less irritable? And then why is it that one being is born as a human, another is born as some other kind of creature that has a different tendencies? So the Buddhist answer to that would be, well, that depends on what states of mind and so in this sense, why it's getting at the answer of, is it taught? Maybe not. Maybe taught's the wrong word, you know, but that it's whatever that being cultivated before is what they're habituated to now. Would be the
Isn't that what
Buddhist.
inherent means? And we were saying that those qualities are not inherent. But if they're born with that, I thought that's what inherent meant.
Actually, I think that I'm misunderstanding the current concept mind. If mind is inextricably linked to the reincarnation that came with the karma, then it's not inherent to the mind itself. It comes from the reincarnation. The mind, or am I misunderstanding?
No, that's right.
Okay, all right, so I thought they were two totally separate things, but if they're two parts of a whole, is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Then the inherent comes from the previous life, the mind itself is, I guess, perfect, clear, right?
Yeah, the mind has the capacity to be perfectly clear. Yeah,
Okay.
that has its
See,
innate
I'm
capacity.
misunderstanding, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's it. No, that's good. That's why that's why it's important to ask questions. But I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, did her response answer your question to you?
I guess so, yeah.
Okay. Right, so it gets a bit complicated though, doesn't it? So, because it's implied, I mean, it starts to, what's the way to say this? Already it implies, in other words, you know, I wasn't trying to bring up reincarnation today, but the question, in other words, as one tries to analyze this, it naturally comes up as a question, right? Because then why is it that somebody can be angry from the day, you know, from when they're an infant, right? But so the Buddhist view would be, still they had to have cultivated that. You know, or habituated to it, or you know, whatever word you want to use. Maybe again, it's hard to find the right words, but habituated maybe is the better word. That they had to have been habituated to that. Yeah.
Is acquired.
Acquired might be a better word. Yeah, and then and this is important that it's acquired due to causes and conditions. Right? And that's what it means when I say not inherent. And in one way, that's what it's saying is it's acquired due to causes and conditions, so it's not. You know, like for example, yeah, so it's not inherent to that thing. Does that make sense?
Like when a baby cries, it's not inherent because the baby's crying because of a condition that has arose. It's hungry, but eventually that condition will change and it will be full. So that makes it's dependent arising.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not going to be crying all the time because it's not going to be hungry all the time. So that's why it's not inherent.
Like a question that comes up for me when you talk about this is like when you talk about like the inherent nature of the mind. What is that inherent nature of the mind? Is that not based on causes and conditions? Like it almost seems, and this is something I always run into when I'm studying like Buddhism is like, how is that different from like like the self or something like that, like the true self, or like even like in I don't know, Hinduism or something, or even Christian, I don't know, but like how
Good question.
I don't know, it gets confusing to me at that point, where it's like, is there a basis for everything, or is there not? Like, is it just like? I don't know
Yeah,
if
it's a
that
good.
makes sense or not.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And like, well, first of all, to be honest, there are different answers and different. Again, you seem to be saying that a lot today. There are different answers from different Buddhist schools' perspectives. But to answer, but to try to answer that more effectively, I'll say this: like, from the, I want to ask you. I guess I want to answer it from the. I want to try and answer it from the point of view of the middle way school, because I think that's the perspective you're asking the question from. So it seems logical to answer it from that perspective. And the answer would be that. Did you say it right? Like from that school's perspective, everything arises interdependently. Right? There's nothing that's independent, right? That exists independently. And so from that school's perspective, first of all, their emphasis in understanding Buddha nature is that the mind itself arises as a dependent, is dependently originated,
Right.
therefore is by its nature empty of intrinsic reality, and that is your Buddha nature, actually, from their point of view. So does that make sense up to that point, first of all?
I mean, are you saying that like the fact that it's empty independently or like arising or whatever, that's what makes it clear? Those like inherent thing. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay.
So what they would say is this what they would say is this actually is that if you look into the if you look at the nature of your own mind, let's say you're meditating, right, like we did earlier, and you're looking into the nature of your own mind. Like sometimes you might meditate looking at a cup and analyzing its emptiness, right? There's a whole way of doing that I'm not going to get into now. But what they would say is this: is let's say you meditate introspectively, right, and you start looking at the nature of your own mind, right? Let's say anybody can do that, right? And when they do that, what they experience is something which is unobstructed, like in that sense, clear, and that knows things, right? And then they label, they say, oh, that's my mind, right? And that process of seeing something, they see their mind, right? They see, I mean, see is the wrong word here, it's a metaphor. They experience something, right, that's clear and knowing. Because that person is habituated to ignorance, to seeing things as truly existent or inherently existent, when this person, right, I'm talking about an ordinary person now, ordinary person introspects and looks at the nature of, I'm going to say his because I'm pretending it's me, his own mind, right, and experiences something that's clear and that knows things. As soon as I experience that, because of my habituation to seeing things as truly and inherently existent, I experience it as a truly existent mind, which it isn't. I then label, I say, that's my mind. Right? So I have a kind of dualistic appearance in relation to my mind, and then I label, that's my mind. Right? That's a form of ignorance. It's grasping at a truly existent, independent, permanent, and permanent is not about emptiness, but they're all connected, mind. Right? That mind that's truly existent and really there is, from a Majjhimaka point of view, is not, the mind is actually empty of being that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so they would say, the fact that the mind is empty of being that is the emptiness of the mind. That's your Buddha nature. So they're not saying, so there is, the question of where does that clarity come from, right? Or,
Yeah.
From the point of view of Majjhimaka, that's a different, they would say, well, that comes from the previous moment of clarity. Right? Like if you ask that, where does this experience of clarity come from? Well, the mind was clear previous moment, now, so it arose, it dependently arisen, due to that cause of, in that sense, that previous moment of clarity was a cause, so you experience the next moment of clarity, and then you label that mind, and that's your experience. Does that make sense? So that's how they would answer that question. If they say, where does the experience of knowing come from? Well, it comes from the previous moment of something that was knowing. Right? Then the next moment of something that was knowing arose in dependence upon that, and you label that my mind. Does that make sense? So that's what they, the question of where does it come from, they would say it's dependently arisen from the previous moment and I guess part of the point though is this, is that and I want to differentiate one other thing because I think this helps answer your question too, is this. All these things, so from a Majjhimaka, from middle way school's point of view, all those things are dependently arisen, that's clear. But then I want to say one more thing, because I think it'll help further clarify the answer, and it's this. It's, let's say you have some mud, right, or some really murky water. This is a basic point from Buddhist philosophy really. In muddy water, right? There's just to put it simply, there's water and there's dirt, right? Those two things can be separated, right? In other words, they arose interdependent. Both are dependently arisen, and then their combination was also dependently, right? In other words, water arose from a hydrogen and oxygen. Mud arose from whatever, the elements are carbon and whatever else. Then you mix those together, right? So all that's there's no doubt that all those things are interdependent, right? independently arisen through causes and conditions. But there's an important distinction to make there, and you'll see what I think, if you can apply this to the mind in a moment, but I want to stay with the example, right? So you can separate the water from the dirt, right? If you leave it in if you leave it in a beaker and you let it settle, and you let all the dirt settle, and then let's say you take that, then you take the water out, then you filter the water, let's say through a filtration system, then again the water is just water, right? No longer has mud in it. But can you separate wetness from water? So there's a difference. That's part of what we're getting at here about the mind, right? In other words, you can separate mud from water because even though both are dependently arisen, right? It's clear that both mud and water are dependently arisen things, right? And they're both, so in that sense, from a Majamika point of view, middle way school, for sure they're both empty of inherent existence. But you can separate them, right? But you can't, as long as water is water, you can't separate wetness from water. What's that?
Except you could freeze it.
You could freeze it, yeah, and then is it still wet? I don't know. And then is it still water? Hey, that's a different question, but I'm not sure. But, or actually, if we want to be even more, actually, let's say with it more technical, can you separate hydrogen from water? No. Then we can definitely say no, right? Because the definition of water is hydrogen and oxygen, right? So you can't, so let's use that because it's actually a better way, since your point is good. You can't separate hydrogen and oxygen from water. There's no such thing as water that doesn't have any hydrogen in it, right? So that you can't, it's still dependently arisen, right? Because there's hydrogen and oxygen, and then they're combined a certain way, right? Two hydrogens, one oxygen atom, and so on, and then you label that water. But you can't, so I guess my point is that something can be dependently arisen, right? Which means it's independent arising and emptiness, or as we said, are two sides of the same thing. So it can, actually it's a good example really, because water has those two, water always has hydrogen and oxygen, right? So it's dependently arisen, but those are in the very nature of that thing, right? Whereas mud is not in the nature of that thing. Does that make sense? So, does that make sense?
Yeah.
How that relates to the mind then? So clarity and knowing, you can't, just like you can't make water without hydrogen and oxygen, mind, the components of mind, mind is still empty of intrinsic reality or inherent existence or self-existence. But just like water is always made of hydrogen and oxygen, mind always has these qualities of clarity and knowing. That doesn't make it inherently
So
existent.
it's inherent to the point that if you break it down further from there, we're not talking about the mind anymore.
Yeah, then you can't speak of mind anymore, right? Then you say you can no longer label that. You can no longer reasonably label that mind.
Right.
So they would still say it's empty of intrinsic existence, but that's different from asking, can it be separated from anger, let's say. Right? Just like it's a different question, can water be separated from mud? Can anger be separated from mind? Is mind intrinsically, inherently existent? Does that?
Yeah, actually, that's a thing.
Sorry. Are you, Paul had a question or comment?
Clarity and the knowing seem separate.
Yeah, and they are, just like hydrogen and oxygen are two, like they're, actually it's interesting, are hydrogen and oxygen and water
Clarity
separate?
seems to come after knowing. But seems to be separate.
And say what you mean.
Sorry?
Just say what, why does it come after? Like temporary?
Okay, that's probably a bad way to put it. The knower seems to be observing the clarity.
If you're meditating on that, then that's true. But for example, if somebody just gets,
separate.
but if somebody just gets angry, right? Let's just say the person gets angry, right? Like, in some sense, their mind has to be unobstructed.
It seems to rise into clarity rather than the knower.
Yeah, and I guess one thing I'll say is this, is really those two qualities of mind always have to be present. His mind it's always clear in the sense that it's unobstructed. Mind never has a form, right? I mean, it can think of a form, but mind never becomes a form.
Maybe I said it wrong. There seems to be something watching what's happening in the mind. So maybe that's not actually clarity, that's mind. Seems to be watching the mind,
You're talking about like self-knowing then.
perhaps.
You talking about dualism? Like,
Well, no, it's just something, the knower.
Because one thing this may relate, tell me if this answers your, I'm not sure if this answers your question or not, but let me say something and see if it does. Next time, next class, one thing we're going to talk about is the 7 kinds of knowing.
No,
Yeah, probably.
no, I've studied that.
So, but there's one that's called a self-knower. You're not talking, like, is that one of the 7 kinds of knowing?
I've
Is
studied it really well.
So are you talking, I don't know if you're talking about that, like, or is this, with different philosophical schools, again, it's a different thing, I keep saying that because it's true in this case, but are you talking about that, this, like,
I don't remember that.
the mind's, the self-knowing quality, which actually the Madhyamaka school doesn't agree with, but other schools do. The Madhyamaka school refutes this idea of a self-knower, but other schools view that there's a
Right.
kind of part of the mind that's a self-knower. Is that what you're getting at?
No, no.
So go ahead and say it again then, because you were separating clarity.
Things arise and they go away, just like mine. There seems to be something, and maybe that's where the idea came up. There seems, and maybe this is just another mental thing going on, for all I know. Seems to be something watching these things arise and fade away.
But do you mean like only when you're meditating, or you mean like in daily
All the
life?
time.
If you're
All
at
the
a
time.
store and you see 5 watches, like that's like if you're at a store and you see 5 watches there, right, and you're trying to decide which watch to buy. I'm just thinking of like a mundane example. Like so, when the 5 watches arrive, like when you look down and you see and you think, oh, 5 watches, which one do I like, right? At that moment, clearly, clearly, obviously, there's the mind is unobstructed in the sense that watches can arise. And obviously there's a knowing because you know those are, like you're seeing and perceiving those are watches. But in addition to that, you're saying there's also what? In that moment.
Something watching the feeling of, ooh, this one's better, no, I don't like this one. Likes rise, fall.
It's sort of self-observing in some sense.
Is it just consciousness?
Perhaps.
Because I do think, actually I do think what I do think that what you're getting at is that it really does relate to the self-knower actually. Like I think you're asserting that there's something like a self-knowing, self-reflective quality to consciousness that's always there, right? That's kind of what you're saying. And I do think it's that actually. I think what you're getting at is something very close anyway to that idea. And so I think when we get to the next class, the 7 ways of knowing, and that one in particular,
Okay.
see if that, I think that answers it. And because some Buddhist schools say yes, they agree with you, or some
Well,
schools say
now-
yeah, that's their experience.
Well,
Others say no.
the mind only school, or is it the Kagyu says that there's an actual other mind as opposed to the overall mind. So I don't know.
Yeah, and the Prasangika Madhyamaka say that doesn't exist, but other schools say it does. So clearly, there's like experience. Because I think what you're getting at is something experiential,
Right.
and I think that's partly where these different philosophical views came from, was people's experience, and then trying to explain them in philosophical terms so that they could discuss it. So I think when we get to that point, it'll be an interesting. I think you should bring this back up, and maybe we can analyze it and see, and maybe even have a discussion about that to see where.
Playing on me remembering things.
That's
Not a good plan.
It's mentioned in that. It's mentioned in that essay that was part of the readings. "What Is Mind" by the Dalai Lama.
Which one? The
Talks about-
self-knowing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that concept is discussed.
Well, I mean,
And so its relation to to consciousness.
Yeah, and that debate. He mentions that debate too.
Or you think about it when you're meditating and you're trying to clear, and the thought arises, and you're supposed to acknowledge it and then let it go. Okay, what's acknowledging it? And then what's letting it go?
And I'll make a comment on that. Like the different, because some Buddhist schools for sure assert that in the moment there's an ability to self-reflect. And again, and that may be valid, right? Or is it, I'm not saying I know which Buddhist school is correct, right? What the middle way schools, the Prasangika middle way schools view is this: they break it. They say they discuss that in terms of these kind of tiny moments I mentioned last time of consciousness or mind. You know, that you can break moments of consciousness down into, you know, many within one finger snap and many within 1 second and so on. And so their view is that it's a form of memory. In other words, that you know, that in one moment the consciousness or the mind is focused on a watch, you know, and maybe in a very, you know, again within very, very short periods of time there can be a moment of mind that's focused on remembering that previous moment that was focusing on the watch, right? So it's a philosophical question. That's worth, but you can resolve it philosophically. You can also resolve it by analyzing it experientially, right? In other words, by analyzing that. Although it's very different. I mean, it's very difficult to do because we can't. It's very difficult to introspect that briefly. You know, to analyze those very brief moments of time. They say somebody who's achieved calm abiding meditation can do that much more effectively. I don't know because I haven't achieved it, but anyway, that's the issue. Is it simultaneous self-reflection, or is it a form of very fast going back and forth between perception and memory or perception? You know, one can analyze it. To me, that's an interesting question to analyze and to reflect on. But that's again, the different schools answer that question in different ways. Like some makes sense. Some say it's simultaneous, and others say it's.
Are you relating that to that concept of the continuum with what consciousness kind of propagating itself, or enlightenment, or whatever it was you referred to? You were talking about the continuum earlier.
The sublime continuum that I mentioned that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the Buddhist view is that consciousness or mind is a continuum, right?
Mind.
Words,
Mind.
That each moment of mind arises. The main cause of a given moment of mind is the previous moment of mind. Yeah.
So it kind of propagates itself then, in a sense, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, say that. It's a cause for itself. Yeah. Each moment is a cause for the next. So you can say it propagates. I guess. It's the cause of the next moment.
And that continuum itself is empty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is empty of inherent existence, yeah.
But ultimately that's based on this idea of time, right? You have this ordering. And that also is empty.
Yeah, and the Nagarjuna has a whole thing about how time is again, and empty doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
No, right.
It's dependently arisen.
It's dependent.
So, yeah.
Yes.
And it's clear time has to be dependently arisen. Right? There's no such thing as an independent time because now the concept of now depends on the concept of before, and so on, right? I mean, so it's clearly, that's what Nagarjuna, in an overly simplified way, that's what Nagarjuna is saying. He's a lot more subtle. Yeah, that it's dependent, and so it's designated dependent on parts and dependent on so on. Since we're discussing it, I want to just I want to make sure we have time for small group discussion a little bit, because that's what you guys we're already doing that to some extent. But the reason why I want to do that is also that whereas only some people will talk in front of the whole group, and I want everybody to get a chance to talk. So I'll just say a couple other things quickly. So the idea, one of the ideas behind Buddha nature, right, is that these faults can be eliminated, right? And also that good qualities can increase, right? And actually, I can make more comments, but you get that makes sense. I mean, you get that that's what it's saying, right? In other words, that if you have a certain amount of love and you want to cultivate more love through effort, you can do that, right? And it can become more and more and more. And the theory, right, is that ultimately it can become something infinite. Right? And the same thing with wisdom, right? If you have a certain amount of wisdom, then if you study and you work hard, you contemplate, you analyze things, you can get more wisdom. The Buddhist view is that if you keep doing that hard enough and with enough effort, eventually you can develop infinite wisdom. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche often says, he says, samsaric works, he says one of the faults of samsaric effort, right, which just means effort that doesn't have this kind of wisdom to it, is that it's unending. Right? Whereas every time you achieve something that's driven by ignorance and grasping and so on, it never ends because you always want something else. You always want something more. And then he says, and this is actually getting at the point of Buddha nature. He says, He says the path is different because it has an end. It's work that finally has an end. In other words, that you can get rid, when you've gotten rid of every single delusion, then you're done. There's nothing else to eliminate. So then you're like, you finally finished your job. And if you cultivate these qualities, that when you finally, if you cultivate infinite altruism, right, and then you cultivate the infinite other good qualities, then that work can also be finished, right? So he says samsaric work can never be finished, but the path, right, of purifying your Buddha nature is a work that can finally end. You achieve Buddhahood, and then there's no more work. Buddha spontaneously and naturally manifests to benefit others, but they say the Buddha doesn't have to make any more, doesn't have any more effort, and it's effortless at that point. But since you guys are asking really good questions, what I'd like to do is this: it's just for like 20 minutes, is to break them into small groups again and let people. I don't want everybody to have a chance to talk. But here's the question: I want to suggest this: is this time we're not going to have like the 3 and then debate across groups. What I suggest is breaking up into groups, but having being sure that some people represent the view that doesn't make any sense, right? And some people take the view, no, that does make sense, right? In other words, it is possible to become enlightened. But I want to suggest some people argue, no, it's not possible. That's silly. You can't become enlightened. Does that make sense? So even if you don't believe that, I think it's useful to argue because the reason why I'm suggesting this is some part of us does believe that, right? I said that earlier. Unless, even bodhisattvas, right? Some part of them believes it's not possible, right? They're not fully confident yet. So we're helping each other if we can represent that part of ourselves to discuss. You see what I mean? That's what debate does. So you want to do that? Just break up into small groups, just for like 20 minutes or so. Some people take the view enlightenment's not possible. Others take the view, yes, there is Buddha nature, enlightenment is possible. And just debate it a bit. Okay? Great. And whatever size group, the group should have at least 4 or 5 people. You could be groups of 5, let's say groups of 5 to 10, doesn't matter, whatever you want. Discussion session as well. I don't want to say much. I'll just make one brief comment about that debate, and then we'll go on and focus on meditation. The only comment I want to make on that, first of all, 2 comments. One is it's nice to see people really discuss deeply and sincerely, so that's cool. And the only comment I want to make on that, aside from what I already said, is this: is to emphasize something that the Dalai Lama always emphasizes, which I think is very useful. And it's implied in what I said earlier, right, about that even like bodhisattvas on different bhumis, these like very high levels of realization that bodhisattvas go through, that one of the qualities they gain is greater confidence, right, that they can become enlightened. And so I just want to comment with the Dalai Lama. What the Dalai Lama emphasizes, right, is always a kind of a reasoned approach or a scientific approach or an approach based on analysis, right? So what's logical, right, if Buddhism is asserting that you can, assert that one has Buddha nature based on that good qualities can increase and bad qualities can decrease, right? Well, the only way you're really going to prove that to yourself is to try, right? Like in other words, if you practice and you see, wow, like look at that, but you have to practice correctly, right? If you practice incorrectly, then then those things won't happen. But if you practice correctly, which is emphasizing the mind, right? Emphasizing your mind, not emphasizing externals, but emphasizing changing your mind, then you'll see for yourself, right? And if you like sincerely, let's say, like I'll give an example, in Shantideva, right, he teaches incredible teachings on how to decrease anger. I'm just giving one example among many, beautiful. Right, Lama Tsongkhapa, incredible teachings on how to increase compassion, bodhicitta. So I'm just saying, you can do it, right? In other words, you can say, okay, for 1 year, I'm going to really focus on decreasing my anger. Right? And let's see, see what happens, right? For 1 year, 6 months or a year, I'm going to focus on increasing my compassion and altruism. And if you practice exactly like they taught. Let's say you do the exact method that, in the right order, and then you see, I did what Shantideva said, for a whole year I worked on my anger, 0 decrease, well then you can assert, well that's not working for me, right? On the other hand, if you try that and you see, wow, like, I'm much less angry than I was a year ago, I can really see it, then your faith will start to increase, right? Then you'd like work on your grasping or some other thing. And I think that's the only way you'll actually change, right? The conviction.
What did you mean by the right order?
What I mean by the right order is like it won't work, because actually the teachings emphasize this, is like sometimes, because Western people, actually anybody can do this, but Western people are really bad at this sometimes, that sometimes we jump to like sometimes what happens is, I've known people like this, that's why I said it actually also, and also the teaching sake. Is sometimes people jump to the most advanced teachings and practice those with a lot of effort without doing the basics. And then it doesn't work, and then they say, well, teachings are, I've known people like that where they start with like, for example, if, you know, it's like this, it's like if somebody says, well, I want to become, let's say, if I say I want to become a physicist, right, and I'm 12 years old, and I say, so I'm going to start studying nuclear physics. You know, they start reading those books, and they're going to say, you know, they study really hard for a year at nuclear physics. A 12-year-old is going to say, wow, that's frustrating, I guess I can't do it. But that's because they did it in the wrong order, right? You know, a 12-year-old wants to start with.
But how does that relate to studying Buddhism?
Yeah, so in studying Buddhism, you would want to start with more. So in other words, what I'm getting at there is this: is like, for example, I talked a little bit today about emptiness, right? But emptiness is a later teaching. That's why, like in this curriculum, it's going to come at the very end. Now, I talked about it because people ask questions, and that's good. But there's nothing wrong with talking about it. But if you mainly made your emphasis, let's say, meditation on emptiness, when you had not yet done the more basic trainings in understanding impermanence, understanding the nature of suffering, it's not going to help much. That's what even Nagarjuna, who taught on emptiness, said that. He said, first cultivate these other qualities, then meditate on this. So that's just to me an example. Like if you start meditating, let's say you spend a year really focusing on meditation on the ultimate nature of reality, which is emptiness. It won't help much. According to Buddhism itself, Buddhism would say, don't do that now, emphasize these other points and later do that. So that's what I meant, something like that.
Where does it say what the order of these things are?
That's in, well, actually, some of that we'll cover in this curriculum, actually. There's a whole section on that in this curriculum, but it's taught also in the stages of the path literature. It's very clear in there. There's a whole bunch of books, and I can share them with you sometime, but we'll cover it in this curriculum too. But it's really clear in these books that the Tibetan teachers and Indian teachers actually wrote it out in a very clear way. They said, you know, first emphasize this, then this, then this, and then this will become easy when you get to it. Whereas if you start with this, just like it won't work because you didn't study the preliminary.
Is that what Lam Rim is?
Yeah, exactly. Lam Rim makes that extremely clear. Yeah, like Lam Rim makes it totally clear exactly what to practice in what order. And Lama Tsongkhapa and Atisha and the great teachers who wrote those Lam Rim texts, they say it very clearly there. They say, you know, if you meditate a huge amount on this teaching before you do this one, you know, it'll be nice, it'll be interesting, but you won't get the realization because you didn't, it won't really work in you that well because you didn't, you know, it's like you jumped into 9th grade before doing 4th grade or something.
Just one question. During this discussion, it came up that, although it's possible to achieve a state of enlightenment, how is it determined that you actually have achieved it?
The real, you know, ultimately it's self-determined. In other words, one knows, you know, but of course people could misknow. You know, sometimes, there's nobody who's enlightened doesn't know they're enlightened, but there are many people who are not enlightened who think they're enlightened. That's the problem. And actually, I'll say one comment.
I mean, I know they're running out of time.
Yeah, I want to. I'll make one brief comment on that. Is Atisha actually in his teaching the 7-point mind training, which I've taught, it says rely on 2 witnesses. The foremost is your introspection, to be honest with yourself. But there is a second valid witness, which is other people's. You know, so if I say I'm enlightened and everybody else I know says, wow, he's really a jerk. You know, you have to rely on both witnesses. In other words, you know, or sometimes they say, like, you know, somebody says, oh, I'm enlightened, but the Dalai Lama says I'm not. Yeah, that's not a good sign. So you want to have both witnesses.
I don't know, that's still kind of shaky.
So you want to have both witnesses consistent. You know, so your own internal and then others, yeah. Okay, well, let's do the meditation on mind is knower because you know these are the especially for those who really want to take the Discovering Buddhism curriculum. You have to actually do the meditations in between. Later, I'm going to give out. I didn't copy them yet, but I'll give out the thing we have to check off that you did on and all that. So, but okay, so for this week, the meditation will be this one: mind as a knower, right? So then we'll have done both aspects. So there are many ways to do this meditation. I'm just going to go through a number of them so that then you can at home do which you know various parts. But again, sit comfortably. This one, the first step, let's do this, is as if we were doing mindfulness meditation. For a few moments, just bring your attention to your breath. And to other present moment physical sensations. Notice your breath as it comes in, the sensations of your breath as it goes out. Notice the feeling of your body. So notice the breathing, also the sense of your body sitting. Sounds that you hear of other present moment physical sensations. That begins to kind of subtly shift your attention to notice the knower. Noticing that which knows, that which is aware, or that which knows the breath. Noticing that which knows the sounds. Noticing the awareness that's aware of your body. Notice how that knower, that knowing aspect or that awareness can be aware of the body. As you begin to relax and be aware of awareness, you notice that it has a kind of naturally also has a quality almost like a mirror, where it just reflects anything. And that it can be quite expansive. So the awareness can mirror your breathing, of sounds, visual stimuli, thoughts or feelings can arise. Sometimes you don't contemplate the objects, but you notice reflects all those things, how it's aware of all those things. Even if you have like judgments about things you're perceiving, right? Actually that's not the knower. The judgments arise to the knower. If you have thoughts about what you're perceiving, those thoughts are not the knower. But they're known. They also arise, they're also reflected. They're also objects of that awareness. You know, just try to let yourself really kind of relax into the process. And watch, and kind of allow yourself to rest in that knowing. And to see how knowing is like a mirror. It's also sort of, in some sense, vast, in the sense that it can know. Let yourself know as many things, and be open. So you're not rejecting thoughts, but you're not following them, you're noticing that which knows them. Sounds, tactile sensations, every kind of sense, every kind of, anything that arises. Not accepting or rejecting anything. You're resting in a kind of pure awareness. Or being aware of a pure awareness. Even if the mind gets distracted. Notice how there's a knower of distraction. The mind is tired. Notice how there's a knower of tiredness. So one comment is, you know, for those who are doing the actual discovering Buddhism, try to do that meditation, you know, this week or next. And actually, since we won't meet for a few weeks, you know, you can do that one, but you can do the other one as well. You know, it's however you want. You know, you can mix it up or whatever. But be sure to do both if you're doing that. Also, in terms of the readings, I just want to suggest for the next class, try to get close to finishing just the packet. You know, that the Discovering Buddhism, Mind and Its Potential packet. You don't yet have to read. We're putting off not yet. You know, the one from the later part of the Wish Fulfilling Golden Sun by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. We're putting off. You don't have to read that yet. You don't have to read the Pabongka Rinpoche yet. Those are for later. But just the packet, try to finish. And then try to do those two meditations for now. Also, and I don't know if you posted this yet. You remember that guy gave that Irith was the charts? Did she?
Yeah, I got it, but I didn't post it.
Okay, so you can post those now. Because the other thing is try to look at the charts, and Gabe will post those. So he'll let you know, or they'll be on that website that Gabe. There's like a bunch of charts, and if you have something that if you have something, I don't know, some people have like digital devices, then bring them with you, or if you print it out. You know, there's just a few pages. But if you have a printer, print them and bring them, or if whatever. But Gabe, you can get them from Gabe on the internet, because it'll be useful to have those in front of you as we go over. I'm going to bring my copy, but if it's convenient for you, that might help.
You said there are three?
Three,
there's Discovering Buddhism packet, the Wish Fulfilling Golden Sun packet, and something else?
Oh, the other one is, there are some readings, and again, they're not assigned yet, but there are some readings in, this one's not online, it's a book actually. Maybe you can get a digital copy of it, but it's Pabongka Rinpoche's Liberation of the Palm of the Hand. And so some of the readings are, and if you're taking the actual Discovering Buddhism, every module has some readings in there. So it's worth buying a copy of that book, and we're using the copy. I emailed it out at one point, but it's the edition from Wisdom Publications. It's by Pabongka Rinpoche, and it was edited by Michael Richards.